The station platform groaned beneath the weight of the storm. Wind rattled the warp boards, driving sleet against the wooden siding until the sound resembled brittle bones breaking in the night. The lantern that swung from the overhang sputtered, fighting for its flame. A young woman stood there, clutching a swaddled infant tight to her chest, her dress damp and streaked with dust from the long train ride that had carried her farther from home than she had ever dreamed. She shifted her weight carefully, favoring one leg, the ankle swollen and tender from a stumble when she disembarked hours before. No one had come for her. The baby whimpered against her shoulder, the sound piercing through the whistling storm. Her name was not spoken by anyone on the platform, because no one cared to ask. The few who lingered at the station looked at her as though she were an object set aside, something promised but unwanted. The depot agent cast wary glances away, scratching at his stubble, muttering to a fellow who leaned against a crate. Their words, though low, cut through the gusts. Mail-order bride, looks like her man had second thoughts. A laugh, quick and cruel. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek to keep from showing hurt. If she cried, the baby would sense it, and she needed him calm more than she needed her own dignity. She had crossed half the continent on letters, on promises scribbled in ink by a man she had never seen. He had told her he would be waiting, that he longed for a wife and child to make his life whole, that she would not regret choosing him. She had believed those words, because to doubt them would have meant staying where she was, trapped in the life she had fled. Yet the empty platform told her more than any words could. She was abandoned, not once but twice, first by the world she had left behind, and now by the one that had beckoned her forward. Hours bled into one another, the storm dragging its claws across the horizon. The other passengers dispersed, wagons rattled away, footsteps faded. The depot agent locked his office door and left her under the sputtering lantern as though she were no more than baggage misdelivered. She lowered herself onto a splintered bench, the pain in her ankle radiating upward, making her shiver all the more. The infant stayed, his small fist pressing against the thin blanket. She kissed his temple and whispered a prayer no one else could hear. Darkness pressed close around the station. Beyond the tracks, the land rolled into endless prairie, black and featureless under clouds that hid the moon. A dog barked somewhere far off, then silence again. She thought of the home she had left, of a father who had called her foolish, of a mother who had cried without words. She thought of the ship across the ocean, of the train across the plains, each mile carrying her father into hope and now into despair. She thought of the letters she had folded and refolded until the creases tore. She thought of the signature scrawled at the bottom, a name that now meant nothing. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but the greater ache came from fear. She was not safe here. A lone woman with a child, injured, without a roof or a coin to her name, was prey in a land where the strong took what they pleased. She imagined footsteps coming back, not of a promised husband, but of men with harsher intent. She rose, wincing at her ankle, and pulled her shawl tighter. She had to move, even if she did not know where. The road that stretched away from the station was little more than ruts cut deep by wagon wheels, now filling with ice and mud. She stepped into it, each movement measured, her breath fogging in the air. The baby began to cry, sharp wails that carried too far into the emptiness. She rocked him, whispered soothing words in a tongue she had not spoken aloud since she left home. Still he cried, and she feared that his voice might draw things out of the darkness. Wolves lived in these lands. Men worse than wolves lived here too. The lights of the station dimmed behind her, until they were only a smear in the storm. Her shawl clung heavy with damp. The infant's cries quieted at last, but his breathing grew shallow against her. Panic surged. She pressed her lips to his forehead, desperate for warmth to pass between them. Her steps faltered. She had come too far to collapse, yet her body threatened to betray her. She saw, through the haze of sleet, the faint outline of trees, woods bordering the open plain. Shelter, perhaps, or at least cover from the wind. She forced her way forward, each limb dragging her closer to the edge of collapse. The baby stirred again, and she murmured encouragement to him, though she could barely hear her own voice. Just a few steps more, she thought. A few steps into the trees, and she could rest. Her vision blurred as she reached the tree line. The ground tilted beneath her. She clutched the child close, refusing to let him fall even as her own body gave way. She sank to her knees in the snow, the cold cutting through fabric, through flesh, into bone. Her last conscious thought was that she had failed, that no one would find them, that they would be swallowed by the storm like so many before. But someone did find her. Boots crunched over the frozen earth. A shadow loomed, tall, broad, moving with the steadiness of one who knew the wilderness as his own. The man crouched near her, his face obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sleet. A heavy coat hung from his shoulders, warm but sturdy. His hands, scarred and calloused, reached toward her but hesitated, as though touching her might tether him to a fate he had avoided. The infant's faint cry broke that hesitation. He lifted the child first, examining him with surprising gentleness, then turned his gaze to the women unconscious in the snow. He muttered something under his breath, words he could not hear, and then gathered both mother and child into his arms. He carried them with the ease of long strength, moving deeper into the trees. The storm swallowed the place where she had fallen, leaving no trace. When she awoke, the first thing she felt was heat. The crackle of fire reached her ears, the scent of smoke and pine needles filling her lungs. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the flicker of firelight. She lay on a pallet of furs inside a cabin small but solid, its logs sealed against the wind. Her ankle throbbed, bound in cloth. The baby lay beside her, warm beneath a thick blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in peace she had feared he would never know again. Relief surged through her, yet it tangled with unease. The man sat across the room, sharpening a knife against a whetstone. His face was carved with lines of hardship, his jaw shadowed with beard. A scar traced from his temple to his cheek, the kind earned not by accident but by violence. His eyes, when he lifted them to her, were the color of storm clouds, dark, unreadable. He spoke at last, his voice deep, rough as gravel. "You're safe here. For now." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her throat ached from cold and exhaustion. She managed only a nod, pulling the baby closer. The man set aside the knife, leaned forward. "Storm will keep anyone from traveling tonight. You'll stay until it passes." She wanted to ask his name, why he had helped her, whether she could trust him, but fear held her silent. She had trusted before, and it had led her to the station platform alone. She studied him instead, the steady hands, the way he watched her without softness yet without cruelty. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. He brought her water, a strip of dried venison, nothing more. He kept to his side of the cabin, as though invisible lines had been drawn. The firelight cast shadows that danced across the walls, and in those shadows she saw fragments of herself, abandoned, uncertain, yet unwilling to surrender. At last, when the baby stirred and whimpered, the man rose. She flinched, expecting harshness. Instead, he reached for the kettle above the fire, poured warm water into a cup, and handed it to her. His gaze did not waver. "A child shouldn't grow cold in this land. I'll give you shelter. That's all I can promise." The word struck her with more force than she expected. Shelter, not love, not marriage, not the false vows of man who had left her waiting at the station. Shelter meant survival. Shelter meant a chance to see another dawn. She clutched the cup with trembling hands, whispered thanks though her voice cracked. He gave a small nod, as if gratitude were unnecessary, as if the act itself was its own answer. The wind howled outside, but within the cabin a fragile stillness took hold. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep into her bones, and wondered whether this stranger might be the end of a journey, only the beginning of a harsher one yet to come. The storm raged on, the wilderness pressed close, and in the glow of the fire, the abandoned bride faced a choice she had not foreseen. Morning came with a sky the color of pewter, the storm weakened but not yet gone. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney of the cabin, and inside the small space the fire smoldered low, filling the air with the smell of ash and pine resin. The women stirred awake, the stiffness in her ankle pulsing with every shift of her weight. She turned her gaze toward the cradle of blankets where her child lay, still sleeping, cheeks flushed with warmth instead of the dangerous pallor of the night before. Relief loosened something tight in her chest, though the feeling was fragile. Across the room, the man sat at the table with his back to her, carefully mending a leather strap with hands that moved slow but sure. He had not spoken much since bringing her here. He existed in silence as though the world beyond the cabin required no words from him. She pushed herself up onto her elbows and drew in a breath that caught with pain. The movement was enough to draw his attention. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes narrowing in a brief, assessing look before he returned to his work. He did not ask how she felt, nor did he offer comfort. Yet when she shifted again, grimacing, he set aside the strap and rose. From a shelf he took a small clay jar, knelt beside her pallet, and without ceremony untied the cloth binding her ankle. She flinched at the exposure, but he held the joint steady, his touch rough yet controlled. He spread a thick salve that smelled of herbs and smoke over the swelling, then rebound it with firm hands. "You'll walk on it again," he said, voice gravel deep. "But not soon." She studied his face, searching for intent in the lines carved there. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still ragged from the cold. He gave a single nod, as if the words mattered less than the survival they marked. Then he stood and returned to his chair, picking up his work again. She watched him, trying to stitch together pieces of him as surely as he stitched the strap, his scar, his silence, the way he moved like one accustomed to solitude. He had saved her, yet he carried himself as if he expected no gratitude and wanted no intrusion. The baby woke with a soft cry, rooting against her. She hushed him quickly, pulling aside her dress to feed him. The man kept his eyes on the strap, but she sensed his attention sharpening. He did not watch in cruelty nor in hunger. He simply listened to the life in the cabin, adjusting to sounds long absent from his walls. When the child settled, she pulled the blanket tighter and finally spoke, though her voice trembled. "If you hadn't found us," she could not finish. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "I didn't find you. You fell across my path. That's different." The word stung, though she could not say why. Perhaps because she wanted to believe there was meaning in the encounter, not made chance. Yet even chance had saved her, and that was more than the man at the station had done. She lowered her gaze, unsure whether to push further. The day lengthened into slow hours. The man chopped wood outside, his axe striking with a rhythm that echoed through the trees. She tried to rise, testing her ankle, and nearly fell again. She hated her weakness, hated needing him. But when he returned and saw her struggle, he said nothing, only set a log beside the fire and carried on. His silence was both a shield and a burden. That evening, as darkness pressed in, the child began to cry again, louder than before. She rocked him, sang softly, but the sound carried beyond the walls. The man's expression hardened. He set aside his knife and went to the door, listening to the night. When he returned, he kept his rifle close at hand. "Wolves," he muttered. "They'll come close if they hear weakness." Her heart raced. She clutched the child tighter, but the wails only grew. The man strode to her, his rough hands reaching. Instinctively she recoiled, thinking he meant to snatch the child away. His gaze cut to hers, sharp but not unkind. "Give him here." Reluctantly she obeyed. He held the infant in arms, awkward at first, then steadier. He rocked him gently, humming a low, wordless sound that seemed drawn from memory older than either of them cared to name. The baby quieted. She watched, startled at the sight of the rugged stranger with her child cradled against his scarred chest. For the first time she wondered what losses are behind his silence. He handed the baby back without a word, but something unspoken had shifted. That night she slept more easily, knowing he kept watch with a rifle across his knees. The following days blurred into a rhythm of survival. The storm cleared, leaving snow crusting the ground, sharp sunlight bouncing off the frozen earth. He hunted in the woods, returning with rabbit or grouse, which he cooked as best she could with trembling hands. He repaired the roof where branches had broken shingles, split logs into kindling, and set snares near the stream. She gathered what strength she could, managing small chores inside, though her ankle ached with every step. The child thrived in the warmth, his cries less desperate, his sleep more even. One afternoon she ventured a question, her voice soft. "You live here alone?" He paused in sharpening his blade, then nodded once. "No family." The sound of steel against stone stopped. For a long moment he was motionless. Then he resumed, his tone flat. "Not anymore." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any detail could. She did not ask again. But that night, as she watched him staring into the fire long after he thought her asleep, she knew his silence was carved from grief. Trust did not come easily between them, yet it grew in increments. When her ankle allowed, she fetched water from the barrel outside while he hauled larger buckets from the stream. She mended a tear in his shirt with clumsy stitches. He left snares closer to the cabin so she could check them with a child bundled against her chest. He never praised her efforts, yet neither did he dismiss them. His acceptance was its own kind of acknowledgment. It was on the 5th day that danger returned. She was hanging damp clothes near the fire when the sound of horses drifted from the distance. She froze, heart lurching. The man was already at the window, rifle lifted. Through the frost he saw 3 riders approaching, men with the easy posture of those who carried trouble as naturally as breath. The riders dismounted outside, boots crunching in the snow. One called out, voice sharp with mockery, "Well now, what's this?" Smoke from a chimney. Thought this place was empty. The man answered with silence, standing in the doorway, rifle steady. Another voice laughed. Heard tell there's a woman came off the train, left high and dry. Might she be in there? Her blood turned to ice. She clutched the baby and pressed against the far wall, praying the logs themselves would shield her. The man's voice rang out at last, low and deadly calm. "You've come far enough." One of the riders stepped forward, hands raised in false peace. "We mean no harm, just travelers looking for warmth." "Keep traveling," the man said. The tension stretched like wire pulled to breaking. At last the riders spat curses, mounted again, and turned back the way they had come. Their laughter echoed long after their shapes disappeared into the trees. The woman's breath shut out. She had seen cruelty in men before, but never so close to her again. When the man shut the door and set the bar in place, she whispered, "They'll be back." He met her eyes, expression hard. "Then I'll be ready." That night, fear lingered, but so did a new thread of trust. She understood now that his silence was not indifference but vigilance. He had chosen to defend her, though he owed her nothing. In the days that followed, their unspoken bond deepened. She found him once at the cradle, the baby's small fingers curled around his scarred hand. He did not notice her watching. His expression then was softer, almost human in its pain. She turned away, giving him back the privacy he rarely allowed himself. One evening, as snow fell in flakes thick as feathers, they shared a meal of venison stew. She dared to ask, "Why did you help us, if you want no company?" He set down his spoon, considering. The firelight carved shadows across his face. A woman and child in the snow. "I couldn't walk away. Doesn't mean I wanted more." "Yet here we are," she said, voice trembling. His eyes held hers. For a moment she thought he might say something more, something of himself. Instead, he only nodded, returned to his stew, and left the silence heavy between them. But in that silence there was understanding. Neither of them belonged anywhere else. And though they were strangers, circumstance bound them tighter than any vow. The snow deepened, the wilderness pressed in, and the threat of the riders lingered like wolves circling unseen. Each day survival demanded more, yet each night the fire's glow seemed less lonely. She found strength where she thought she had none, and he allowed her presence where once there had been only solitude. When she lay down at night, the child nestled close, she no longer felt abandoned. She felt tested, shaped by trial, and watched over by a man who said little but gave more than words ever could. And though danger had not yet reached its peak, she sensed the reckoning was drawing closer, waiting just beyond the trees. The wind changed before the trouble returned. It carried a different scent across the ridge, sharper with smoke that did not belong to the cabin and the faint reek of horses held too long to bridle. The man noticed it first, his hand freezing as he stacked split logs. His eyes narrowed, searching the tree line. The woman, tending the pot over the fire inside, felt the shift in him before he spoke a word. When he did, his voice was stripped of softness. "They are back." She stiffened, clutching the child closer. He stood by the window, rifle already in his grasp, his shoulders taut. She stepped beside him and peered out, though fear clawed her. 3 riders again, the same shapes as before, moving slow through the snow, not hiding, not hurrying. This time they carried more certainty, the arrogance of men who believed no one could deny them twice. Her breath fogged the glass. What will they do? He didn't look at her. What they came to do the first time. The riders drew nearer, dismounting within sight of the cabin door. They spread out, forming a half circle, one carrying a torch that hissed against the cold air. The leader, a heavy man with a beard crusted in ice, called out, "We gave you warning. You're harboring something don't belong to you. Hand the woman over, and maybe we'll let you keep your walls." The child stirred at the rising tension, crying into the folds of her dress. She hushed him desperately, her pulse hammering. She turned to the man, eyes pleading. "What will we do?" He set his jaw. "What we must." He opened the door, stepping into the snow, the rifle leveled in his arms as if it was simply another part of him. The woman clutched the baby and remained behind the doorway, every instinct warring between staying hidden and standing near him. The leader's grin spread wide. "Now there's a sight." The hermit crawls from his hole. "You planning to take on all three of us?" The man's voice cut through the wind, steady, final. "You take another step, and it'll be your last." For a breath the standoff held, snow drifting between them like falling ash. Then one of the riders laughed, harsh and reckless. He pulled his pistol, and the world snapped into chaos. The man fired first. The crack split the air, the closest rider dropping into the snow with a cry. The torch tumbled, sputtering against the ground. The leader roared, rushing forward with gun drawn. Bullets screamed past the cabin walls. The woman dropped to the floor, shielding the baby beneath her shawl, heart exploding in her chest. The man fought with the precision of someone who had bled before. Each shot was measured, each movement deliberate. But the riders were not green, and they pressed hard. One circled toward the side, forcing him back against the cabin door, wood splintered where a bullet struck, showering her with fragments. She bit down a cry, clutching the baby tighter, forcing herself to silence. The leader charged, slamming into him, rifle knocked wide. They grappled, the snow beneath them staining darker as the fight dragged on. She couldn't look away. His face twisted in pain as a knife flashed, cutting into his side. He bellowed, heaving the man off with raw strength, but the wound soaked his coat red. Something inside her broke. She could not cower while he bled for them. She set the child down in the cradle of Faze, whispering a promise, then seized the iron kettle from the fire. She burst through the doorway, steam rising from the scalding water as she flung toward the rider circling with pistol raised. He screamed, stumbling back, and she snatched the torch from the snow, thrusting it toward him with every ounce of fury her body held. The man seized a moment, driving his fist into the leader's jaw. The gun clattered from the man's grip. With a final strike, he forced him down, pressing the rifle barrel to his chest. The leader froze, chest heaving, eyes wide with sudden clarity. The snow fell heavier, muting the world around them. "Leave," the man growled, voice broken by pain yet iron-hard. "Leave now, and don't look back." The second rider, burned and staggering, pulled his companion to his feet. They dragged their wounded leader away, stumbling into the night, swallowed by the storm. The silence they left behind roared louder than gunfire. The woman dropped the torch, trembling. Her breath came in gasps. The man sank to his knees, clutching his side, blood seeping through his coat. She rushed to him, kneeling in the snow, hands shaking as they pressed to the wound. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with the same storm-dark fire she had seen the night he first found her. "You're hurt," she whispered, panic clawing her throat. He caught her wrist, grip weak but steady. "Still breathing. That's enough." Together they struggled back inside. She laid him near the fire, tearing strips from her skirt to bind his wound. Her hands moved with desperate determination, refusing to falter. He winced but did not cry out, his gaze fixed on her face as though seeing her for the first time. Hours passed in a haze of tending, feeding the fire, soothing the baby, returning to his side again and again. The bleeding slowed, the color returned faintly to his cheeks, though his strength was sapped. At last, as the storm eased into quiet, he spoke. "You should have run," he rasped. She shook her head fiercely. "I will not run again. Not from you, not from anyone." For a long moment his eyes searched haze, disbelief warring with something softer. Then he let out a breath that was almost a laugh, though pain laced it. "Stubborn woman." Tears filled her eyes, though she held them back. "I've been left behind once. I will not leave someone who stood for me when no one else would." The child stirred, and she gathered him close, rocking gently. The man watched, his expression unreadable, though his hand stretched toward them, hovering just above before pulling back as though afraid of what it meant. She caught the gesture, and instead of speaking, she shifted, placing the child within his reach. Hesitant, he let the small fingers curl around his own. The baby's grip was fierce despite its size, and something in his face cracked open, raw and unguarded. The fire burned low, its glow casting fragile light. The danger had passed for now, but the future remained uncertain. She knew the riders could return, that the wilderness still tested them with every breath. Yet within the cabin there was something more enduring than fear. As dawn came, pale and cold, she stood at the door and looked across the snow-swept land. The station, the abandonment, the shame, all of it seemed part of another life. Behind her the man stirred, sitting weakly but alive, the child nestled against him. She turned, and in the sight of them together she felt a strange, fierce peace. He caught her gaze. His voice was hoarse, but the words carried weight heavier than iron. "You don't owe me anything, but if you stay, this place could be a home." Her breath caught. She wanted to speak of dreams she once had, of vows that had broken, of the ache of loneliness carried too far. But none of that mattered now. Home was not built on letters or promises. It was built on firelight, on hands that saved, on trust forged in trial. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him. Her hand brushed his, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I don't need promises," she said softly. "I only need shelter, and you've given me that." He looked at her then with a depth that carried both sorrow and something unspoken, something that could grow if given time. She did not ask for more, and he did not offer it. The unspoken was enough. The cabin settled into silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the child's gentle breathing. Outside, the wilderness stretched vast and indifferent. Inside, three souls shared warmth against its cruelty. They had no guarantees, no map for what tomorrow would bring. But they had survived, and survival was its own kind of promise. The woman closed her eyes, leaning against the rough log wall, exhaustion washing through her. She thought of the words he had given her that first night. Shelter. It was not love, not certainty, but it was more honest than any vow she had known. Shelter was safety. Shelter was hope. Shelter was a ground from which something greater might one day rise. And for the first time since stepping off the train, she believed that perhaps she had not been abandoned after all. She had been found.